Today's graduation address gives us the opportunity to hear from a distinguished member of our alumni community. And we're very fortunate today that the address will be delivered by Mr. John Garnaut. Mr. Garnaut graduated from Monash University with a Bachelor of Laws degree as well as a Bachelor of Arts degree, and began his career with the Melbourne law firm Hall Wilcox. Mr. Garnaut moved with his Monash Law School alumni wife Tara and their children to Beijing as China correspondent for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, before returning to Melbourne as Fairfax Asia Pacific editor. He joined the office of Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull as a senior advisor, before developing a consulting business providing foreign interference risk reviews and tracking China's expanding technology footprint, understanding political developments and support clients in assessing opportunities and risks. Mr. Garnaut is also the author of The Rise and Fall of the House of Beau and is currently a senior fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. I now have much pleasure in inviting Mr. John Garnaut to deliver our graduation address today.
Thank you. It's a wonderful thing to be coming back to Monash, because this is where wonderful and consequential things happen. I had some very brilliant teachers, Sarah Joseph and Melissa Castan amongst them, whose, I think, sheer enthusiasm got us over the line. And probably the most wonderful and most consequential thing in my life happened in my very first week here, just over at the Union building, when I was sitting by myself in a crowded room reading my legal process reading brick, and a shoe landed right on my page that I was trying to read, and I looked up, and the owner of the shoe came over to reclaim it, and she pointed to her friends, who were all laughing at me, I thought, and explained that they thought it'd be very funny to throw her shoe into the crowd and watch her retrieve it. And that's how I met my wife, Tara Wilkinson. So, thank you for that opportunity. So Tara's here somewhere, I can't see in the lights, but look, I was never a very good student, and part of the reason, I'm sure, is because Tara was sitting right in front of me before I met her, and it was very distracting. So when I was in your shoes, and I've sort of, I give a lot of talks, but there's not many that make me stop and think. When I was in your shoes, everybody else seemed to know exactly where they were going. Friends of mine like Hari Morphus was going to go and join a big law firm, and she did, and now she runs some big private equity firm somewhere. My friend Valeo Garnaut wanted to be a cool theatre director, and then he ran the coolest theatre in New York. Our friend Josh Frydenberg said he was going to be Prime Minister. We'll see about that. But that wasn't me. So the truth is that I didn't really enjoy studying that much. I wasn't that great at it. And at this point, exactly where you were, I think I probably felt a little bit ashamed because I couldn't actually get a job. I hadn't got a summer clerkship. My grades weren't that great. I didn't know anyone in the right places. And I did honours in history because I loved history, but also because I had no other option. So, and that kind of reminded me that when I came to Melbourne, I came to play football. In fact, all I wanted to do was play AFL football. And I lived with another kid from Canberra. His name was Jimmy. We joined, I was training in the year, for those of you who follow, in the year of the baby bombers, it was 1994. And, I wasn't good enough. I got injured, I got cut, and that really hurt. And that was my first kind of, adventure in life. But I learned so much from that experience. Part of the reason was I was living with this kid, Jimmy, who was this ginger-haired, skinny, super shy kid. And he just worked and worked and worked harder than anybody I've ever seen before, and trained harder than anyone I'd ever seen before. And then I watched Jimmy grow into this man, James Hird, who became a fantastic footballer. And I never, even though it was me who failed, I had this privilege of watching true professionals be the very best that they possibly could and do things that I didn't know could be done. So Jimmy, what did he do? He sought out great mentors. He had great mentors. He never made excuses, never once in my experience. And he pushed himself harder than anyone I'd ever seen. And he really trained smart as well as hard. And this could obviously be applied to anything. So as I was free from the curse of playing professional football, I had plenty of time on my hands. And when I was at university here at Monash, I had time to do a bunch of part-time jobs, at least I tried to. And I think I got sacked from every single one of them. My favourite job was doing the bottle recycling run up in the northern suburbs. And I could keep fit, and I loved it, and great people. You get dirty sometimes, and all the beer would drip on your head when you put it in the truck. But I got sacked from that because I got my diary wrong and I didn't turn up once. And then I got a job as a security guard in an RSL club out at Seaford, and I lived a very long way away. And exactly the same thing happened. And then I got sacked from another job, and I don't think that was actually my fault, but there was a pattern here. And each time, and by the time I got to the end of my degree, with not that much to show on my transcript, I'd really become an expert in one really important thing. I had become an expert in failure. And I'd become, let me rephrase it, to be more precise, I had become an expert at recovering from failure. But that wasn't something that I wrote on the 100 job applications I wrote that year in the manila folders and sent them all off. I told big law firms that I'd always wanted to work in a big law firm. And, I told small law firms that all I wanted to do was work in a small law firm. And everything in between. And then I finally did get an interview. I got an interview at a firm, of course. I always wanted to work at this firm, but I'd never heard of it. And I was interviewed by this old man, probably the oldest man I'd ever seen. His name was Jeff Durham. And he had these big kind of Buddy Holly black-rimmed glasses and these tufted eyebrows just kind of jutted out in front of them. And I'll never ever forget this, but he picked up my CV, and it looked like it hadn't just been taken out of its manila envelope, and he literally threw it at my chest. And he said, "I haven't had time to read this. Who are you?" And in that moment, I'm just kind of gasping for breath and picking myself off the floor in my mind and thinking this is over before it's already begun. And in that moment, I forgot all of my phony rehearsed lines, and I told him, what I was really worried about, what I really cared about, what was important to me, and who I was. And I got that job. And so through my time at Monash and around Monash, I'd made a lot of mistakes. In fact, I just completed my master's in mistakes, really. And then just 3 weeks later, I got to try it again. I got to work on this again. It was our trainee article clerkship kind of week in where you're supposed to learn, all these things you ever need to know in 1 week. These great article clerk colleagues. And it was Jeff Durham again. And I thought we were friends, right, after that first encounter. And within 5 minutes, he absolutely stunned me. He accused me of cheating in an exercise that we had done. And I didn't know what to say. I'd made, almost every mistake that I could possibly think of, but that was not one of them. And that night I couldn't sleep. I was sure that my law career was over, 3 weeks into it. And the next morning, I don't know why I did this, but I walked into his office, and I said to Jeff, or Mr. Durham, as everybody had to call him. I've never called anybody Mr. in my life, and this is Mr. Durham. And I said, look, I know you've made up your mind, and if you've chosen to sack me, that's your choice. But I want you to know that you're making a mistake. That I've made lots of mistakes in my life, but cheating is not one of them. I'm not a cheat. That's not who I am. And he stared straight at me, and I thought, what's going to come this time? And he stared straight at me, and he said, "That's exactly what I was hoping you were going to say." And so from that moment, everything changed. And I still don't know if this was a test that he had set me, some kind of charade to see who I really was, or he really did think I had cheated on some test or something. But from that moment on, I'd kind of been able to shed all of that sort of that pretense and just get on with being who I was for better and for worse. And I had the remarkable remarkable opportunities, but my mistakes kept on happening. I remember the first a week or two after that trainee course, I was, look, if you need, I've only got one bit of legal advice for all of you: never ever do conveyancing. It is the second most stressful thing I've ever done, apart from the hospitality job I got sacked for as well. I'm very good at some things, but remembering the salt and the pepper. But so I had to do a conveyancing. I had to go catch a tram into somebody else's law firm, and it was a big fancy two-rack house. And I had a cheque for $150,000 in my hand, and I had to come back to the law firm and explain to Mr. Wilcox, and it just happened to be that this guy had his name on the law firm door, and I said, "Sorry, Mr. Wilcox, I think I've lost the cheque." I left it on the tram. And he just laughed and laughed and laughed. And he cancelled the cheque, and look, I rotated out of conveyancing pretty quickly, but it was not the end of my career. And I hooked up with a guy called Tony McKeon, who was in the commercial law business. He was about 2 years older than me. I was only mid-20s. Just a phenomenal person. He took the time. He gave me work way beyond what my pay grade was. He pretended he didn't know the answers already. He'd talk it through every day that I came into his office. And I found out that even though I was actually objectively a lousy law student, I was actually really good at practicing it. So I enjoyed my time against all expectations as a financial services lawyer. But I, for whatever reason, for what fancy took me, I went and took a different job. I went and became a cadet at the Sydney Morning Herald. Long story, but I just love newspapers. I just love reading newspapers. And again, I just kept on seemingly hitting trees everywhere I went. And I remember thinking, only then did I start to realise some of the things that I had learned at law school, which were important. I had learned to really care about words. Making words mean what you want them to mean is really important, and actually a rarer skill than you might imagine. And it's a skill that all of you have that not everybody does. I learned to care about logical arguments, and again, it's a skill that not everybody is trained in. Reason and evidence-based reasoning are the sorts of skills that are transferable everywhere. I learned these abstract concepts which I totally took for granted and didn't like them at the time and didn't think they were important. What is an agreement? What is a fiduciary responsibility? What is a corporation? This is just second nature for any of us in this room, but it actually doesn't make sense. The average person doesn't know the difference between a corporation and a business entity because they've never been taught it. And so as a journalist, I was really, without even knowing it, using these skills, the fact that I could make words mean what they were supposed to mean, and I had a little bit of an understanding about what a legal person was and what a company was. And I had great fun, and it took me all over the place. And my first investigative story was quite by accident, but I don't know if any of you, it's probably a different generation, but in my day we all loved to watch Crocodile Dundee. So one of my favourite sort of 80s films, and I got to find out that the proceeds from that film, wherever they started, they got washed all around the world and went through the Isle of Man, or maybe it was Jersey or something, through some very dodgy accountant. I hope I don't get sued for this. And this case, and it found its way back to Australia. And I remember reading the next day, we got the letters into the editor, and Paul Hogan, the star of that film, was accusing me of being that dirty little worm at the Sydney Morning Herald. And we put that on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald as well. And there were other investigative stories, and I remember there was a real estate magnate who sold a shopping centre in New York, and we traced the proceeds of that through all kinds of wonderful places, the great kingdom of Liechtenstein, I think, and if you've ever, for those of you who studied trust law, might have remembered something called an Anstalt. I didn't understand it at the time, but completely impenetrable trusts. And this huge amount of money found its way from New York through Liechtenstein and ended up at a National Australia bank account in George Street. That was my first encounter with defamation law soon after that. And so as a journalist, Tara and I, we went to China. Just the most wonderful experience of our lives in so many ways. And I remember when I first got arrested, which is up on the far northeast of China, on the border of Siberia, unbelievably cold, insanely cold. I don't believe that any animals could really live there if they chose. But here we were, and it was this awful land dispute, this background with politics and power and guns. Anyway, I'm sitting here being arrested, petrified out of my, nothing like this had ever happened to me before, but with my assistant, my Chinese assistant called Sang He, and he was a deeply Christian person, and he was the calmest person I'd ever seen in my life, and I thought, just follow his lead, just breathe. But, we got let out and that all went fine. And the second time I got arrested, it was easier. And the third time I got arrested, we'd actually meant it to happen, because the only way we could talk to anyone in officialdom in this particular city was to introduce ourselves to law enforcement. And so I became a real pro. But again, from the accidents and the mistakes, that's where I think all of my most important learning happened. I hope I'm not digressing too much. And look, this is probably the most important point that thinking back through all of these meandering mistakes. It was only in my time in China when I was, where I really got to understand for the first time, and viscerally and personally, what it was that I was supposed to be learning when I was reading my legal process book. And that was the remarkable invention, the civilizational bedrock of the rule of law. I'd completely taken it for granted. In fact, I'd never thought about it as a lawyer, and I'm embarrassed to say that. So it was only in a country where people were striving for it and fighting for it that I understand the miracle that we are all part of. And I also came to the view that the deepest, probably most common political yearning is justice. And so these, again, after being on the wrong end of things and running into a few trees, that was my learning experience. So, I returned from China. I was sued successfully this time by one of Australia's most influential billionaires. I was excoriated by a former Prime Minister. I was upset. I think each of the previous 5 Prime Ministers I've managed to upset in very serious ways. I was chased around by foreign intelligence agencies for a little while, right here in Melbourne. So when I first learned that I was going to be writing speeches for Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, was actually the day after I started in his office. I read it on the back page of the Financial Review in a Joe Aston column. And the first speech I wrote for him went fine, went to Tokyo, everyone was happy. The second one was his big major one, because every Prime Minister, I didn't know this at the time, they go to Washington and they make their big claim on the world. So I wrote that speech, and I put a lot of time into it. And Malcolm was a lawyer, and I worked from first principles and justice and rule of law and the world order and all of that, and I did my absolute best. And then I remember hearing back to me, they were all on the VIP plane to Washington, and the quote that I heard back was from the Prime Minister. There was this silence, and then as he's reading through my speech, the draft before he delivered, "I feel physically sick." People said a lot of bad things before, but there's none quite struck me quite like that. And the senior advisors from the bureaucracy, and some very senior ones, they were absolutely panicking. And they said to me, don't you understand, this is existential. I think they wanted me to panic, and they thought that was the right way to, and they all kind of wrote over my speech, and I busily unwrote it. And I thought, actually, if there's a problem with this speech, it's not my problem, it's his. And so he got off the plane, he put his top on it, a nice personal anecdote, he read the speech, it went down very well, and he never let anybody else write his international national security speeches for the rest of his term as Prime Minister. So by that stage, I'd learned something from the school of, that you're all a part of, the school of Monash law and life. And, I'd seen that particular play before. I knew it wasn't the end. Nothing is ever really the end. And I put that learning into a bunch of speeches, including his next big speech he gave at Shangri-La, the Shangri-La Forum in Singapore, and it was all about the rule of law and how that was the common denominator amongst nations in standing up to these new kind of geostrategic challenges of coercion and foreign interference. And that was the framework that we put into that speech, and it all comes from this journey that I'm describing here. So when I'm thinking, what is it that I would have liked to have known when I was right where you are, because I certainly didn't know it at the time. I think probably, and it is a bit emotional seeing everybody here, I think probably I would have liked to have known, yes, you will all get a job. I would have liked to have known that you've already learned a huge amount, both personally and professionally, probably much more than you know. I would have liked to have known that your worth is so much more than the sum of your grades on your academic transcript. And I would have liked to have known that in the real world, what really matters is character. You don't need brilliance. Not many people have it. I saw some just a moment ago, but not many people have that. You do need hard work. You do need integrity. And above all, you need resilience. So over the next few months, although what's coming may feel for some of you fraught and very uncertain, I hope it's helpful to know what the old guy, Mr. Durham, who's still alive, by the way, in Hawthorne, he was the oldest man I'd ever seen back then. He still goes bushwalking up in northwest Victoria. He's amazing. I hope it's helpful to know, what he told me in his office that morning when I thought my law career was over before it had begun. And it's not what happens to you that matters, it's how you handle it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's been a particularly special address in my capacity. There will be others up on the stage who have heard many graduation addresses before. But that was special for many reasons. You certainly set a first in this auditorium, John. I've never heard of an alumni couple coming together because of a thrown shoe before. But beyond that, your candour, your courage just to share failure after failure and the learnings that came from it right through an extraordinary career. I thought the failures may have stopped in your early 20s, but... And I actually detect a touch of nervous laughter there because, you know what, doesn't matter how old you are, we all fail. That's such an important part of learning, and you don't stop failing when you're young. And John impressed upon us, whether you're a young law graduate or a seasoned advisor to the Prime Minister, there are awkward moments all along through life, and the important thing is to use them as learning experiences. It's absolutely consistent with the motto of this university, Ancora Imparo, we never stop learning. I haven't been called that dirty little worm before publicly, but you concluded by talking about resilience, because along the way there will be times when people call us names or we think treat us unfairly. But like that bouncing ball, just to keep going up and up and up when people try and put us down. So important. You saved the best till last though, John. With all of that candour and personal exposure, you reminded us that what really matters at the end of the day is that we are worth so much more than the sum of our grades. Yes, we have congratulated people today who have done extraordinary things, but if they rest on their laurels when they're 23, life will pass them by. And at the end of the day, we are worth so much more than the sum of the grades that we happened to get when we were very young. And you concluded by talking about character, hard work, integrity, resilience. These are the things that take a lot more than 1 or 2 university degrees to get really good at. And John, all I can say is thank you again. You've made us much wiser.